Cool. Well, we're really excited tonight to launch Ground Truth, Arthur's semi-weekly speaker series where we'll bring in some of the brightest minds from AI, ML, policy, the tech ecosystem writ large, investing, and others. Stay tuned for that. This is the space, obviously, that doesn't move very quickly. Glacial, really. When I think about what AI and ML and policy around it looked like 10 years ago, I often question my life as a professor, which actually is why I'm here in industry now, having left that job to join, well, this space where nothing ever moves, well, except for every week or every day where we see it in the news. So today, to kick this off, we're really lucky to have an expert in an area that I think is really undergoing an inflection point between academic research and industry and also governmental adoption. So we're honored, honestly, to have Rachel Cummings here. She's an associate professor at Columbia University, homed in the IE and Operations Research Department, but obviously with a strong affiliation with computer science, AI, and ML. And she also co-leads the Cybersecurity Research Center there, which I believe is in the Data Science Institute, which is another one of these sort of multidisciplinary tech-focused institutes. Prior to that, she was an assistant professor at Georgia Tech, and prior to that, had a PhD from Caltech and a number of other sort of listed accomplishments from Northwestern and I believe USC. So from the academic side, we love accolades. Who doesn't? And she's gotten all the sort of big ones that a junior or mid-career researcher would get: NSF Career Award, DARPA Young Faculty Award, Apple Privacy Preserving Awards, JPMC, Google, Mozilla, et cetera. I can keep listing these, but we're not here for that. Her work focuses on, and you'll learn more about this tonight, data privacy. And so that is a broad space that combines machine learning, economics, econ CS, optimization, statistics, public policy, communication, and so on. And so you'll hear a little bit tonight as well about her work in sort of the policy space. So she's on the advisory board of, for example, the ACM US Public Policy Council's Privacy Committee and their Future of Privacy Forum. So without further ado, we'll get a 25-ish minute talk from Rachel. We'll have a Q&A session, and then we can take some more questions from the crowd.
Wow. Thank you, John, for perhaps the kindest and friendliest intro that I've ever received. Truly, it's such a pleasure being here. So as John mentioned, my work is sort of at the interface of academia, industry, policy, and so I'm excited that I can sort of be here tonight and share all three of those. One a disclaimer that I always give in my talks is that I have a minor speech impairment, so if I pause briefly, I'm probably not just daydreaming. I am funny. There's some promises earlier. So my talk today will be about how do you communicate technical guarantees to people who may be math phobic. And so I know that's not the people in this room because you're here, but in general, we oftentimes have to communicate to people who are not engineers and mathematicians and so on, and how do we communicate things without their eyes glazing over as we talk about PDFs and so on. This is a joint work with a fantastic team: Gabe Kapchuk, Priyanka Naniakara, Alyssa Red-Miles, Marianne Smart. All of them are from different universities and come from different backgrounds. And so I'm especially proud of the fact that we are a very multidisciplinary team coming from very different strings to solve this big complex problem. Good. So I'll be talking about how do you communicate specifically a differential privacy. And a quick poll. In this room, how many folks have heard that phrase before? Differential privacy. Oh, that's a surprising number. Okay, wow, good. Okay, good. So then my first two slides, they're all about oh, this is so confusing. Will in fact not be so hard here. So I'll start by talking about how do you explain differential privacy in a room like this. And there's only 2 slides, but I want you to think about, as I talk about it, what would not work if you were explaining this to your grandparents or something. So we'll start, and a differential privacy was defined in 2006 by Dwork, McSherry, Seaman Smith, and in pictures it is this. If I take a database D containing data coming from n people, and I plug that into my favorite randomized algorithm, that will give me out like a PDF of the possible outputs of this algorithm instantiated on this particular database. Now, a privacy guarantee says if I were to change one person's data, say that I change Alice into being Javier, and I then plug this new database that is the same except for one person's data into my same randomized algorithm, I'm going to get out a different curve. And our question is kind of like how close are these curves in the worst case over kind of all possible databases, all possible Alice, and all possible Javier. And we'll measure like a closeness of this curve as being the bound on the ratio in the worst case point-wise over these two curves. So now you might think, if you haven't heard of it before, which I guess almost everyone has, you might think, how does this correspond to like privacy? You're talking about like bounds of ratios of some output PDFs. How is this privacy? So now imagine that we had the point on the blue line that was like produced by this algorithm, and then someone who's an adversary tried to like figure out, do we produce this output because of Alice's data or because of Javier's? Who was the person in my database? And they cannot, information theoretically, make any inferences beyond the amount allowed by this bound on the ratio. So this is how our bounds translate into a thing that feels kind of like privacy. In math, it says this. So if we have an algorithm M mapping from n tuples of data, think of this as being data coming from n people. It is an arbitrary output range R. It's going to be called an epsilon differential private if it is the case that for all pairs of neighboring databases, D and D prime, they're the same except for one person's data, and for all possible things in my output space, I'm going to output that thing with about the same probability under these two different databases. So we're effectively bounding this kind of a maximum amount, one person's data, can affect the results of the computation. And because we're talking about randomized algorithms, we bound it in this strange, a probabilistic way. So some nice properties in the last, how many years? 15-ish years? My field has done a ton of work. We have developed a ton of different algorithms that will give you both privacy as well as accuracy for your task of interest across problems like machine learning, statistics, optimization, economics, and so on. And these tools are also used in practice by some pretty big name organizations, and this is only a small a partial list. So we have a differential privacy. It's great, it works, and it's in use. The question becomes, if you want to convince users that you're doing it and it's great, and they should feel good about this, which they should, how do you do this? What goes on this billboard? And I will say in this case, this a particular billboard actually is describing differential privacy, which you might notice is pretty different from the way that it was presented on the last couple of slides. So we want to ask, how do we explain differential privacy in a way that is both easy to kind of understand, but also captures the core principles of the privacy guarantee that is provided? Now, if I were to modify this to be a little bit more technically precise, I would say that what happens on your iPhone generates a random signal that's correlated with your data that does leave your iPhone, but that doesn't look as nice on a billboard. So they went with this one. And the reason that we care about this is because we want to empower users to make informed choices about their data. And we want to be able to really offer them choices. Do you want to participate in this a differentially private computation? And if so, what epsilon? And these are things we are just not equipped to even begin asking in a way that we can expect reasonable, informed responses back. So this is our goal. And And I'm going to have a two-part talk today. And I know this is a short talk, so I'm going to be skipping a lot of the details, but I link all the papers at the bottom. And so first part is just about communicating the definition. What is differential privacy? What does it promise and what does it not promise? Because it doesn't promise nothing leaves your iPhone, even though the billboard says so. So our question is basically, how does the way differential privacy is described impact users' expectation of privacy against certain information disclosures? And in the paper, but not mentioned today, we also think about what are the type of information disclosures that are important as we ask this question, and then also how does the way in which we describe differential privacy affect people's willingness to share data as well. And I'm happy to share these answers offline. So the plan of attack, which is also a plan for the next few slides, is we first went out and we looked at how is a differential privacy described in the real world. It's been talked about in kind of industry press releases. It's been talked about in kind of academic papers. It's been talked about in kind of journalism and tech spaces. And so we wanted to see how do people describe it in a sentence. Then we went out and we then did vignette-based surveys to kind of ask people about a particular data sharing scenario. What are your preferences? How do you perceive things? And then we asked them, given a particular scenario, in a particular privacy description, would you share? What type of privacy expectations do you have based on this? And then we asked them things, and then we evaluated which of these differential privacy descriptions are the most effective. So the first part is we found there were roughly 6 themes corresponding to these privacy definitions. And so we group things into these 6 topics, and for each of them we developed one single canonical differential privacy description in a way that really captured some of the core essence. And I won't bother reading them all to you, but I'll tell you some of these core themes. So the first one is about kind of no information. It says things like differential privacy is a gold standard. Great, but what does that mean? Number 2 talked about the fact that it used a randomized statistical noise. Number 3 talked about the fact that it enabled analyses through a previously impossible while still protecting individual data. Number 4 relied on kind of a trust of some kind of institutions, and things companies including Uber and Google use it. Strangely enough, math was a trusted entity. We saw lots of articles being yes, it's very mathematical, so you should trust it. Okay. Number 5 was about how it reduced risk to the user if they were to participate in this analysis. And number 6 is one that we took straight out of a differential privacy academic paper, solo authored by Dwork. They really captured all of these, and we thought, if this is the way we describe it amongst ourselves, does this work? We expected not, but it's good to test hypotheses. And we gave them a vignette, and I'll sort of give you an overview because I know this is hard to read. But so we said, imagine that you work in the banking industry in a particular city. All of your friends also work in the banking industry in the same city. One of your friends has a part of a salary transparency initiative, and they want everybody to share their salaries so that we can measure this. I think as a part of this initiative, there's a website, and you can input information onto the web form about your job title and your salary. And then we add, to reduce the intrusion into personal privacy, your friend says that they will use a tool that is called a differential privacy. And then we introduced one of our six privacy definitions here, and then we also had a 7th a no privacy baseline. We had a second vignette that was a very similar, but you were asked about kind of I'm sharing your health record with a with a non-profit medical research institute, just to see if things like salary versus healthcare make a difference. And so then with this, we asked them a very short survey, and aside from all of our standard demographics and attention checks and so on, we asked them two kind of core questions. And the first one is kind of like, would you share your data? And then we also asked them, which of the following information disclosures would you expect to be possible? And we gave them 6 that we had identified in a previous survey, and these are kind of hackers, law enforcement with a warrant, organization collecting your data. So this could either be the kind of a transparency initiative or this medical research group. And the analyst is the person working there, organizing your data. And a graphs is about kind of graphs and charts, computed based on your data. Will they leak information about you and your information? And then finally, a third-party sharing. And so we asked them, which of these following disclosures would you expect to be possible? And now if you're thinking, technically anything is possible because differential privacy is a randomized notion, and so possible versus probable are very different. You're right, and in that case, hold on for part 2 of the talk. It's about exactly this. So the results are that we found a very, very, very heterogeneous effects. And there's no a one single answer that kind of worked all the time. In fact, we found that different explanations cause people to have different privacy expectations, and this was even different across different people. And so there's no single this one always works for this group and this one doesn't. It's just kind of different people like different things, which is not the most satisfactory answer, but that's the data. So in this picture, so this shows basically kind of we have on the left-hand side, we have kind of all of our different privacy description methods, and then in the columns we have our different privacy protections, and the color columns indicate there was a significant difference at the 5% level in people's privacy expectations relative to the no privacy baseline. So colored cell means a kind of comparing against. So again, this one in the top left, we have the kind of unsubstantial causes people to expect privacy against hacks significantly more than the a no privacy baseline causes people to expect protection against hacks. So we kind of don't know what to make of this. Again, there's no single thing that kind of works all the time. We can make a little bit of inference. We can say things talking about risk does indeed talk to things everybody wants to hear apparently, and it makes them expect stronger privacy protections. Similarly, talking about the kind of algorithmic techniques used. Some things that were not very great is this unsubstantial and trust. They really didn't make people expect very strong privacy protections. And similarly, we see that kind of almost all of these cause people to expect stronger protections against things analysts and graphs and charts based on their data. Nobody expected privacy against the kind of organization itself, and very few, only risk, cause people to expect a privacy against law enforcement. So we have this. And the question is what do we do with this information? We mostly just see a lot of heterogeneity in the responses, and that's not particularly actionable. Maybe you want to do personalized privacy. How does that really work? But importantly, we're not just thinking about, does it make you expect stronger protections? We're actually asking, does it make you expect correct protections? And before we talk about a correctness, we have to distinguish between between like two different privacy models, central versus local. So in the central model, think of something like the census. They're going to like collect all of your data, store it, look at it, analyze it, and then they're going to like publish something about it, and the thing they publish is going to be private. On the other hand, local model is basically like doing kind of like on-device privacy, on-device noising, and so this is things like Chrome on-device, iPhones on-device privacy. We're going to kind of like add noise to your data before you share anything about it. And by the way, that's why the kind of like a billboard was about what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. It was like describing this model. And so of course, in the central model, there exists a database that can be hacked, subpoenaed, shared, and so on. And so as we talk about like possibilities, all these things are more possible. In the local model, there's not a single database containing everyone's data, so you can't really even like access it, hack it, share it, and so on. So using this, we can like define our ground truth with respect to these like two different models. And so false means that it's not possible, true means that it is possible. And there's a little like asterisk, which is for a sort of like typical implementation, and these don't necessarily have to be true. For example, like Uber implemented differential privacy in the central model because it didn't like trust its employees, and so in that case, and that's their problem. And so then in this case, there was like a not protect, or there like a was protection against the organization and its employees. So this is kind of like typical. So we can like go back and we can track if I were to like take everybody's answers about kind of like whether or not they expected privacy protections, I can grade those same answers against like two possible ground truths. And so on the top here, we have local, on the bottom here, central. And for each of these, we have our like 6 possible like privacy explanations as well as a baseline. On the bottom, we have scored what is the like a fraction of responses that were correct. So remember, these are true/false questions. And like in the central model, we see people are getting them roughly half right. So they're just the same as kind of like random guessing. In the local model, they're getting true/false questions right 25% of the time. So definitely not good. And this told us more work is needed here. Let me see. So this is where I switched to like questions of this part. And so in fact, like this part will be shorter because it's like a very much work in progress. So I don't have as many answers here, but I have some like exciting things that are happening. So there's like 2 important things that we thought were really missing as we talked about like a differential privacy definition. One of them, of course, is like local versus central. We see people are just pretty wrong about that, and that's not good. And then also this notion of the epsilon. So we have some like a work in progress on like both of these questions. And so we have these like 2 different models, and they're basically like written the same in math. But as we saw, they give very, very different real-world privacy protections. And so like, how do you convey this? So we have ideas. And these all end in a like question mark. We have just finished pilots, but we don't have any results yet. So these are all like very, very fresh. So you might think about like privacy nutrition labels in the sense of like in our food, we don't need to know chemical compounds and processing. I just have to know how many calories, how many grams of protein, and so on. And somebody somewhere decided these are the like correct like a small number of details that are important, and I can like communicate that. Everything else isn't important to the end user. So you might think about like a privacy nutrition labels. Maybe this, as you compare in the central model versus local model, and you want to compare kind of like a with privacy protection and without. So these are very, very clear. I personally don't like them. Because it makes the central model look very weak. And so there's like so many things that are possible in the central model. But those things are things like hacks or like law enforcement subpoenaing you, like a third-party sharing. Those requirements are totally different from like a differential privacy, but that's about your like security practices and your legal policy. And so that's like not differential privacy's fault. So this is why it's like ongoing. You might model things instead in terms of like data flows, who can see what part of the process. I personally like these, and I think they're the most clear and the most precise. However, they have not done very well in our pilots, so we're probably not going to proceed with them. I'm obviously very biased. On to part 2 of this question, how do you explain epsilon? So also if I talk about like, how likely is it for your information to be leaked through some graph or some chart, well, that depends on the epsilon. And of course, talking about epsilon doesn't really capture people's intuition about privacy. It's a like bound on the log of the worst case Bayesian update of an adversary's posterior. Like this is not how people reason about privacy. So maybe we have to think about like implications given some epsilon. What's a thing that you might care about? And 2 things that we have ideas about is you might want to bound how much more likely is a bad thing to occur as a result of this analysis of your data. Or it might be, here's some like, observations of an output of the algorithm. And so we call these things odds-based versus like sample-based. And one challenge is that people are just like remarkably bad at reasoning about like risk and like low probability events, and this is just like how do you explain low probability events in this way? So we have our 2 different like privacy explanations. One is sort of saying if there's like a certain chance of a bad thing happening to your data, then I can like plug in some like numbers based on the epsilon. And those are the ones that are kind of like odds-based. Sample-based is more of like a vibe check. How's like here's 5 samples. How do you feel about them? So we developed. So we did a Vignette-based survey again, where we said you work at a company and they want to know, is your manager adequately supporting you? And you think like, no, that guy sucks. But you're afraid of saying it because of like, retaliation and the manager might get back to you and so on. And so then we gave them like a privacy explanations with various epsilon. And we evaluated a bunch of things, which I'll skip so it can be done. And we developed like 3 separate like kind of like ways of explaining this. One is simply text. In our particular example, with a particular epsilon that we don't tell them, we like store in the back end. If you say yes, then there's like this chance, manager will think you said no, and so on. And then we had like a visualization condition where we paired this with a visual, because again, people are bad at reasoning about probabilities, but if you show them pictures, it helps. And then we had our like sample outputs condition. And we found that these like odds-based descriptions are in fact like the most effective, and so this gives us promising things to kind of explore in the future. But again, these are very, very tailored, and like in order to like plug in 39, you have to know a whole lot about some kind of like worst case details of this particular scenario, how many people in your database, what does your manager believe, what is their prior, and so on. So this works, but you need to sort of like instantiate it into your particular example, and like sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's not. I'll say in general, this is a part of a bigger picture. How do we explain differential privacy? End users are one, but there's like a lot of other people who are kind of like interacting with these privacy tools, and they oftentimes have to make like choices about them. For example, like engineers working with data, database managers, executives who have to like decide, do I want to use like a differential privacy at my company? Lawyers are very important in things like compliance. Am I allowed to even do this? And then of course like a policymakers who can write like a laws about these things. So papers, thank you. and I was told to put up the last Arthur slide.
So at this point, maybe if there's like one or two directed questions about the talk, we can start with that. But I'd like to more quickly maybe transition into a fireside chat with Rachel as well. So any like quick pressing questions about her talk?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, like, individual. With differential privacy, you want to see if an individual is included in the distribution. What about for like groups of individuals? Do the same type of ideas apply?
Yeah, yes. So the question was that like a differential privacy is like a defined at the individual level. What about groups of people? And in fact, the privacy guarantees do extend into small groups where like a privacy guarantee degrades smoothly with the size of the group. And so the goal of like a differential privacy is to learn about the population, but not about the individuals. And so if you're a group of say like 2 or 3 or 4 people, that's still kind of at the like individual level. But if your like group is like half your population, then this is like population level information and not at the individual. And so one like a very nice thing is that it also gives us immediately like a group privacy guarantees where you can like quantify precisely what are the guarantees given to a small group as a function of their size. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So probably a lot of us know people who they say, I have nothing to hide. I don't care about privacy at all. Always agree, always accept. Was there anything in your methodology to kind of soak up those don't care at all people, or have that not pollute the rest of the investigation?
Yeah. So we're like a no privacy baseline was sort of like a capturing that. Is we asked basically like the exact same thing, but kind of like without a privacy paragraph at the end. And so then we can see how likely are people to kind of like share data in the first place, and then we can like use that as a baseline.
Last question.
So you mentioned earlier in the talk that math was just implicitly trusted sometimes, and I know. Thank you. You mentioned in the talk that math was implicitly trusted sometimes, and I know that from studying election cybersecurity, just saying that, oh, trust us, the math works out, is not sufficient in that case. How do people distinguish, like, this is math I trust and this is math I don't trust?
Yeah, good question. So our finding that kind of like, trust the math was coming from kind of like existing ways to like a differential privacy had been like described in the wild in things like tech articles and in companies like press releases and so on. And so we also found, even though people use like trust us, it's math, that actually didn't really cause people to have stronger privacy expectations. So in some sense, we found like relying on like trust us didn't really work, which is, I think, important guidance if a company wants to like use these things in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. So we're going to have a bit of a fireside chat now, and then we'll open it up for Q&A again, general Q&A. So for all those hardball questions that I've planted in the audience, hold those to the end. Oh, hi, Rachel. So yeah, why don't you maybe take a quick seat?
Yeah. I guess, thank you.
Cool. So everybody asks, what is Rachel Cummings doing? But nobody asks, how is Rachel Cummings doing?
Yes.
We'd just love to hear maybe a quick intro to yourself, like what led you to Columbia, to econ and machine learning, and to differential privacy writ large.
Yeah, so there was never a grand plan. Like it would be a sort of like easier and more glorious tale of my life if I said, yes, this was the vision and I did it. Like I just kind of always liked math, and I just kind of kept doing what I thought was cool. I also believe that I'm just like fundamentally unemployable, and so we just like so I just kept getting degrees so I didn't have to get jobs. I graduated as a math and econ major in the middle of the 2010 financial crisis. So this was like not a good time to be looking for jobs with that skill set. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just go to grad school. I wasn't even super sold on it, but I figured like, worst case, I'll just like, drop out with a free master's and like that'll be cool. In the end, I liked it. Turns out I like doing research. I really like thinking in this kind of economic mindset about people being very strategic. I know what that says about me, but I like thinking about sort of like strategic manipulation of a system.
That also says something.
Yeah, it does. It does. And so I came to privacy actually via that path. I've worn so many different like strange hats, like math and econ and CS and machine learning, and then I went into operations research because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do, and that felt like a very nice like a convex combination of the three. As I was like math, econ, CS, OR. Turns out that's like its own other field. I hope this is not being put online. I'm not yet tenured, so yeah. And so like I started thinking about privacy in terms of like people's kind of like incentives to make sure people don't learn about their data, and that sort of naturally led me to the privacy questions.
Cool. Yeah, that's a motivational path. No, that's a great answer. And actually, you touched on something that I think leads into the next question, which is you have a very multidisciplinary background across tech and then increasingly communication and policy as well, which I think we see this all the time in AI ML as this continues to eat the world. Is we have people who were trained outside of computer science who are entering into the field. We have people who were trained inside of computer science who are now what I would say exiting the traditional field. So a lot of movement going around. If somebody wanted to, say, move into this space, and that could be either academic or it could be like policy comms, any advice?
Yeah, good. I have notes because actually this is a nice question, but a hard one. So I think I would give totally different advice if you wanted to do the sort of technical algorithmic stuff versus policy stuff. I should say as background, even though this talk was very much communication, social science, I really come from a computer science algorithmic background, and so this is a new exciting venture for me. On the academic algorithmic side, be good at math and know algorithms, know probability and know statistics. I feel like in this room, everybody is like, okay, check, done. One a very nice thing about the field of a differential privacy is that it's very, very modular algorithmically. So there's 3 algorithms, maybe 4. And just everything is built upon that, and so it's very, very simple to really go into it, and you can learn it in a week, 2 weeks, and then you can think about how do you build complex algorithms from these very simple building blocks, and so it isn't a scary field to learn. On the communication and policy side, I would say this is a interdisciplinary field, and just get really good collaborators who are different from you. It's so valuable, and this is what I love about our team. So we have myself, differential privacy expert. We have a cryptographer. We have a HCI survey design person. We have a person who is more traditional computer science and privacy, and we have a person who is getting a joint PhD computer science and also on communication. And so that's such a unique team, and we couldn't have done it if we didn't have this a diverse skill set.
Yeah, awesome answer. And I think that'll generalize also into, as I mentioned, things that are, as if anyone would not want to move into differential privacy, but other sorts of fields that touch society that are coming from tech. Yeah. Really cool. So speaking about policy, any advice for present day policymakers?
Oh, I have so many opinions. So most privacy policy, I would say all, but I haven't read the text of all privacy laws, and so I'll hedge and say most, but possibly all. Do not tell us what are we allowed to implement algorithmically to be compliant with the laws. And so if I want to run a new differential private algorithm, epsilon equals 1, is this GDPR compliant? I don't know. It's not clear. And so I would say to policymakers, write policy that really like integrates like a technical best practices and like a technical state of the art into the laws, and also make it easier for companies who want to be compliant, but they also like want to innovate, to be sure they can innovate legally.
Yeah, it's a great answer. I think that
It's
this
a
has been
huge
like
gap.
kicked around a little bit as this idea of like a sandbox where you're allowed to sort of play around at the edges of the law because the law isn't quite there yet, so long as you open up a bit to regulators as well. And so basically if you misstep of what they see as the law, they'll slap you on the wrist but not put you out of business, that kind of thing. So do you
Yeah.
see that as like a valuable step forward?
Yeah. And I think this is why we don't really see differential privacy in critical arenas for things like healthcare, medicine, is because there are very, very strong privacy laws regulating this, and you like do not want to violate them, which means you like don't want to innovate and you don't want to risk doing something wrong. But there's also like a huge opportunity there that's kind of being missed.
Cool. Well, if you could change one thing about this general field, we could do differential privacy or plus policy or even econ CS, really whatever the spiciest answer you want to give is. What would it be?
Two things actually. I'll be bold. One is just like a diversity, and this is true like very broadly across kind of like everything STEM. Is we don't have enough diversity in the pipeline. So many people are kind of like working hard to like change this, but this is maybe a like 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, and I would love to see more of these initiatives to really like bring in new voices and new people. So that's one. Another one is like particularly in the space of like a differential privacy, I would love to see this being taught earlier and more broadly. And you see this both in industry as well as in like higher ed, is like I want to recruit people to do PhDs with me who can do like a differential privacy, but because there are like very, very few undergraduate level like a differential privacy classes in the country and the world, very few people are even kind of exposed to it. And I think the same thing is true in kind of industry as well. I'm like extremely impressed with this room, but there might be some like selection bias here. Is you have like very smart, very technical, highly educated people who just like don't know this stuff. And so like I would love there to be more sort of like education out there, and this even ties in with my last slide, engineers. We're all very smart people, but if you don't know the like specifics of the definition and the parameter tuning and the implications of the epsilon, you're not really equipped to like use this stuff in practice. And I would love to see more of that.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And coming back to your response to an earlier question, with the relatively small number of obviously very delicate and detailed building blocks for differential privacy, one could imagine math cross communications, or these sort of technically minded but also communications minded, junior researchers and junior practitioners learning about differential privacy, not in a silo, but without the full computer science curriculum, alongside policy or communication as well, which I think would be pretty cool.
Oh yes, I would love that.
So,
A plus idea.
Thank you. Two final questions. One is predictions for the next 1 to 3 years, and the other is going to be predictions for the next 10 years before going to audience Q&A. So would love to see, what's overhyped right now. Do you have some hopeful breakthroughs? Where can we see business impact or policy impact immediately? Anything like that.
Yeah. So like in your questions, one of them was kind of like what is most overhyped, and I had written, if you had asked me like 3 years ago, I would say like deep learning. It's like totally overhyped. But now I couldn't have been more wrong. I admit that. So maybe I don't want to speak as to what it's overhyped, because I'm sure that I would be wrong. One couldn't be more wrong there. One thing that I think is a really important and big area of growth is doing like a differentially private synthetic data. This would just make so many things easier, is if companies can just hand over data sets to consultants, researchers, partners, even like competitors, and be sure those data are not going to leak whatever they want to protect. And we don't really have good tools for that right now. We have like a deep learning, which again, like no, I'm not, which like works like a surprisingly well, but there's no like theoretical performance guarantees. And we also have like a super exponential time algorithms that give good performance guarantees, but you would like never want to run them in practice. So we don't really have stuff in the middle ground that's kind of like efficient and is guaranteed to work well. And this just seems like a huge opportunity. And it's a really hard technical question, but it's like too big to ignore.
That's awesome, yeah. And then the second one, so moving out to maybe 10 years, or pick some n greater than or equal to 10.
Yeah.
Any biggest opportunities, if you were, say, just getting into the field, things to focus on, and also some risks and things to be mindful of.
Good. So I think in general, and this is maybe advice that I would have for people getting into the field as well, is sort of like a look at the needs of practice. I think that like, especially like as an academic, it's way too easy to sort of like, be in my ivory tower and think like, yes, like this model is the right one. But if that's not the model that is real, and if that doesn't match like a practical needs, you can write the best paper ever and like no one will care. So I think like, looking into practice and kind of like, what are the needs in kind of industry? What do people wish they could do privately, but they can't right now? That seems like the right question. One of the big things is, of course, like a privacy accuracy trade-off. And this is a frontier that is kind of always being pushed as you see more algorithms doing better and better, like composition methods and so on. One of the reasons companies are somewhat averse to using differential privacy is becomes some loss of performance, and we're trying to make that loss as small as possible. But like making it smaller and smaller is going to have a huge impact. I think the other dimension is like inspired this work actually is thinking about how do we make differential privacy something that companies can just like take off the shelf and use and say like, yes, I'm doing it, and that includes convincing their lawyers that it's okay. And that involves like convincing policy makers to write laws that make lawyers say it's okay. This involves building like open source high quality libraries so that if you are a smaller company and you can't afford a privacy team, you don't need one because there exists a library. Things like this, as well as these like educational efforts. How do you pick epsilon? How do you tune epsilon? I think that is sort of a suite of questions that once they're answered, differential privacy will become the norm. And these are the barriers that are like stopping it now, but might take 5 or 10-ish years to address.
Any specific risks come to mind, or like things to look out for?
I think I have notes. Ooh, yes, I do. So this is not necessarily a like long-term risk, but this is like in general a thing to look out for when you are using differential privacy is that it's very, very subtle. And this is kind of what the talk began to like scratch at the surface of, is things like this like epsilon matters and things like composition across like analyses of the same database matter, and even things like pre-processing our data set can like possibly leak information. And so it's like surprisingly subtle, even though like the building blocks are simple, putting them together can be subtle, and doing it without like thinking through the kind of implications of these choices, it may lead you to, let's say, not have the privacy guarantees that you think you're having.
Got it. Well, that's all the questions that I have, and I want to say thank you for the talk, thank you for coming, thank you for the candid back and forth here, and before we open maybe the stage up to, well, the audience here, maybe a quick a quick clap to thank you. Great. So I believe if you're here in the offices here at Arthur here in New York, please, if you're asking a question, do take the mic. And if you're on Zoom, I think somebody's maybe reading chat and we can ask. Yeah. If you're on Zoom, feel free to ask a question via text. So any questions?
Yeah, we just have one from the chat. This is from Piotr. He says, differential privacy's goal is to not have to reason about background knowledge or prior belief, but people think about privacy in a manner that requires reasoning about priors, which you have demonstrated in the manager feedback example. Is it possible that differential privacy is just not compatible with what people want from privacy?
Ooh, a spicy question.
That's why I didn't come here in person.
Exactly, hiding. So I think this sort of gets to my point about kind of like looking at the needs of practice. And I think the needs of practice have really evolved since like 2006. So this privacy notion was invented by a team of like cryptographers who are used to thinking about like worst case adversarial attacks and like protecting against those. And is good. And we want those kind of privacy notions. But on the other hand, especially now, modern day data era, we really want to get value out of our data. And sometimes protecting against things in the worst case requires adding too much noise. And that will harm the analysis and the results. So I think this is a very, very delicate balance is you can relax some of those privacy assumptions. As you can say, we're not going to be doing things in the worst case anymore. We're going to be doing things in the average case based on my a domain knowledge. And then you can probably add much less noise. The question is kind of are you sacrificing something on the privacy side? What if your domain knowledge is wrong? Or what if it's outdated? What if it was correct and then people are different now and you're gonna get a different data and those assumptions no longer hold? Are you failing to provide privacy in some kind of meaningful way? And I don't really have an answer to this. I think this is maybe a kind of area of growth in the future is finding something in that delicate space of kind of still providing formal, strong privacy guarantees that also incorporate things like domain knowledge while still providing rigorous privacy guarantees and giving good accuracy. And I don't have a good answer, but I suspect this is a highly complex question.
Yeah, but I can add a little color to that as well. A lot of what you said also resonates with adversarial machine learning and adversarial attacks writ large, which is A, they're delicate, and B, if you have underlying drift in whatever you trained on versus what you're testing on, basically all these guarantees go out the window. And a question to ask in both of these areas, right, is is it the right thing to do to be focusing on the absolute 100% worst case, be totally robust to everything when that's going to probably kill accuracy in many, many settings, or understanding when it's okay, that trade-off. And so we see that in adversarial ML a lot in practice, and it's interesting to hear that here as well.
Yeah. I think this is a sort of domain-specific question of kind of what type of privacy guarantees are going to be okay to provide. Are there some cases where it's okay to provide weaker guarantees, and there's some cases where it's definitely not okay? So I think, modeling both what's known as well as what type of adversaries are you trying to protect against. And it becomes more sort of an application specific then, but I think this is an important question going forward, and this is where this privacy accuracy frontier becomes important. Is you can push further on the accuracy side, and the question is what are you losing on the privacy side, and is that an acceptable trade-off?
Cool. Questions from chat? Questions from the audience here? I think I saw a hand. Yes, in the back there.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm the founder of an NLP startup, and the field has always struggled to contend with cryptography, and that's even when we understood the algorithms, right? TF-IDF, PM25. And now the proliferation of LLMs, albeit closed source LLMs, in my mind compound the cooperation of the two. And sorry if I missed this, if you talked about it, but how do you see the two areas cooperating in the future? Cryptography and closed source LLMs, especially as each model is a step function more challenging to grasp than the last.
Yeah. So I will answer a slightly different question that is more inside of my expertise because I don't know as much about kind of LLMs and how they work. I mean, something like a GPUs, something deep learning, stochastic gradient descent, backpropagation. That's an extent of my knowledge. But I can address the question: how do I see like a cryptography working with like a differential privacy? And in general, the fact that we have like many complex pieces of like a privacy protection, and what's sort of like underlying all these like privacy guarantees is that we are like assuming perfect crypto. And the fact that we say people are gonna like give their data from their brains or their devices into some server that's gonna hold it and protect it, well, that assumes you have like secure channels and secure storage and all of this. And this is sort of what we like began to see as we talked about these like, is it possible that a particular data leak might happen? And we realized a lot of these data leaks are sort of not differential privacy specific, but rather they're part of a like holistic security approach. And it's like, as a kid, if you see all these like, breakfast cereal commercials and they advertise how it's so great, and then like at the end, they're like, it's a part of this complete breakfast and it requires like toast and juice and all of this. And it's like, that's what like a differential privacy is. It's one part of a complete privacy breakfast. And, and you can't have it alone, you have to have all the other parts. And there is definitely a sort of like research thrust understanding how we combine differential privacy with these tools, because a lot of the initial work assumed like perfect crypto, and now we have to think algorithmically, how do we integrate differential privacy with things like secure MPC? We need algorithms for that. How do we do it? And so there's like work in this direction. I think there's like a partial answer now, but this is very much like ongoing work with the field specifically.
Questions from chat? Questions from Meet Space? Yeah, maybe one more question.
Hi, first, thank you, Dr. Cummings, for your insight in your chat. It was really fun. My question is, when you were structuring your research with your collaborators, were there particular industry verticals or companies that you had in mind as potential adopters of whatever, like nutrition labels or communication techniques? Or in then as the research progresses further, that you'd be potentially interested in partnering with?
Ooh, I love it. I'll answer the second part first. I'm very interested in partnering with like whoever wants me. Email me. But really, like I think this is something that is like challenging for me as an academic, and I'm thrilled to be places like this. Is that I spend a lot of time not in a company thinking about how do companies work and what do they need, and I sometimes imagine things and they're sometimes right and they're sometimes wrong, and so it's way better to talk to people who are kind of actually doing this. And one challenge is that companies are sometimes hesitant to tell people about their inner privacy workings for very understandable reasons. And so I love opportunities like this to kind of hear what do companies want, and I'm very open to hearing things to the extent that various NDAs allow, of things like, oh man, I really wish there was a tool for doing this. That'll be fabulous. Tell me if you want these things, because this can be of mutual benefit as well.
So this is actually a great closeout, because clearly you're not going to ask these pre-NDA questions live on a live stream or here in the audience. So I'll say maybe three things. One is feel free to ask those questions obviously offline or after this talk. Two is thank you very much, Dr. Rachel Cummings, for coming in to this place, which is Arthur, the AI performance company, you might recall. And so with that, this concludes our first Ground Truth speaker series. So let's maybe thank Rachel again and call it a day.